And Brooke, you might have to unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah, if you want to go ahead and there you go. All right, so everybody should be muted throughout the whole presentation. I am going to go ahead and introduce myself and introduce our presenter, and then we'll get started. So my name is Brooke. I'm a program coordinator here at Alzheimer's Services. I'm sure a lot of y'all have seen my face before on these presentations. Thank y'all for joining us today for our ADAPT series presentation as we continue Alzheimer's Awareness Month. This is our final ADAPT series presentation of the year. If you missed the previous 3 from this year or our 3 from last year, you can find all of them on our YouTube channel. I'm going to send a follow-up email after the presentation that is going to include a link to our YouTube channel and also a link to an evaluation. For all social workers who are joining us and needing a CEU certificate, you will need to fill out the evaluation for me to get your CEU certificate to you. For some housekeeping, all of the calls are going to remain muted throughout the presentation. If you have a question or a concern, put it in the chat box. If for some reason you can't hear something, put it in the chat box, let us know, and we'll figure out any of our tech stuff. I do ask that for anybody needing a CEU certificate, please ensure that your Zoom or name is your display name is showing your first and last name. That's just going to help me accurately track participation for CEU certificates. If you have any questions, like I said, put it in your chat box and we'll read it out at the end in the question and answer portion. So our presenter today is Brooke Schoonenberg. She is a distinguished dietitian with degrees from both Tulane and Louisiana State University. As the nutrition services manager at Women's Hospital, she spearheaded the Food is Medicine programs and implemented telehealth processes during COVID-19. And she played a pivotal role in the metabolic weight loss clinic's success. She coordinated the diabetes prevention program in line with CDC standards and was recognized as Young Dietitian of the Year in 2016 by the Louisiana Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. She is an active member of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics and is a certified lifestyle coach and a passionate advocate for community health and wellness. And I'm sure you saw through our different promotion of this material, she does work for Women's Hospital and the Women's Center for Wellness. So a distinguished person to talk to us on this topic. So thank you all so much for joining us today and for joining us in Alzheimer's Awareness Month. And I'm going to go ahead and pass the floor over to Brooke.
All right, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. So now I feel like I need to live up to the hype because that was that was quite the introduction. So thank you. I appreciate that. And so like Brooke said, I've been a dietitian for about 10 years now. Feels like forever just because the science of nutrition is always changing, but I love this topic because I do believe that food is medicine and that we can use food, we can use our lifestyle to positively impact the way that we live and our quality of life. So what I'm going to be talking to you about today is delaying dementia through diet. So objectives for today, we're going to discuss the research regarding the MIND diet and its efficacy. And don't worry, if you're not sure what the MIND diet is, we're going to define that in just a second. We're going to discuss the components of the MIND diet, and then we're also going to learn how to apply these concepts. So I'm not just going to be telling you what to do and what not to do, but also how do you do it. I feel like the application part is typically the most difficult, and so hopefully you'll get some ideas before you leave the presentation today. Okay, so MIND diet stands for, and it's a mouthful, the Mediterranean-Intervention for Neurodegenerative Delay. So I know it's a lot. That's why I like the acronym. It is relatively new. It was just coined, I believe, in 2015, so not even 10 years old yet. There was a researcher that I'll reference at the end of the presentation that put a lot of work into this project through lots of observational studies. She and a few of the other colleagues put together the components of the MIND diet. It combines Mediterranean and DASH diets. So Mediterranean diet, if you're not familiar, I like to think of the old food guide pyramid, where the base of it in the Mediterranean diet is plant-based foods. So whole grains, fruits, vegetables, beans, nuts, legumes, lots and lots of plant-based foods. And we'll get into why in just a little bit. And then same for the DASH diet. The DASH diet was originally studied for its ability to decrease blood pressure. And so again, just like the Mediterranean diet, very, very heavily based in plant-based foods. So both of these diets have been around for a relatively decent amount of time. I would say at least a couple of decades. Well, Mediterranean diet even longer than that, of course. Both have been proven to help reduce blood pressure, heart attack, and stroke. So you're probably thinking, okay, so that's cardiovascular. So how does this relate to brain health, right? And so just to dive a little bit into that, what's the diet and dementia link? So it's oxidative stress. So when we think about blood pressure, when we think about heart health, we also think about oxidative stress. And so essentially that also plays a big role in neurodegeneration, or basically the breakdown of healthy cells in the brain. And so when we increase our intake of antioxidants, which there's so many of them, I can't even name them all. I would say there's probably thousands, but some of the common ones that you might be familiar with would be like vitamins C and E. Intake of these antioxidants can actually reduce this free radical damage and oxidative stress. And I know that's a lot of sciencey terms, so if you're not familiar with what free radicals are, just think of these as like the little villains in your blood and in your body. And so they are trying to wreak havoc in your body, and they're trying to mess things up. And then when they do mess things up, it turns into this thing called oxidative stress. And it's just really hard on the body. And so what we try to do is we try to have our antioxidants, our superheroes, come in, and they kind of clean house. They try to get rid of the villains, and then they try to make your body a really nice, beautiful place to live, for lack of a better word. I hope that's a decent way to explain it, at least. And so first I'll start with the Rush Memory and Aging Project. So that researcher I mentioned from a few years back, she did this huge observational study, and she basically created what's called a MIND diet score. So she looked at all of this research and she said, okay, if people eat lots of this and not lots of this, then I'm going to give them points based on whether they do or do not eat these certain things. And then when she did that, she figured out, okay, well, people that have the highest score, which is a good thing, actually had a decreased 53% decreased likelihood that they were going to develop dementia. And then even people that didn't have a high score, but they had a moderate score, even those folks saw a 35% decrease in developing dementia. So really, really statistically significant research right there in terms of delaying that progression and preserving that brain health, which is, of course, all of our goals. And so just to give you an instance, like if you used olive oil to cook with, then you got a point. If you used butter, then you got 0 points. Or if you ate a green leafy vegetable every day, you got a point. And so they were looking at thousands and thousands of people. So they had tons of data to use, and they have been using this MIND diet score in a lot of additional studies. And like I said, nutrition is a forever evolving science. And so probably as we're speaking right now, they're doing more with it. And so to get into more of the nitty gritty, because that's an observational study. So essentially you're looking at characteristics of populations, what are they doing, and then can we draw some conclusions from these? So not necessarily what we would consider the gold standard. What we would consider the gold standard would be something like a randomized control trial, which is what RCT stands for on this slide. And so when we started getting into randomized control trials, that's when we weren't seeing as statistically significant data like we did in the observational trial, but we still showed good results. So I say that because research is tough, science is tough, and it's really hard to put people in a bubble. And so when you're trying to look at diet, there's also other things that you have to consider. You know, are they exercising? Do they sleep well? What are their genetics like? Do they smoke? Do they get adequate sunlight? Are they stressed? So there's all of these other confounding factors that can play into a person's health and brain health. And so to try to isolate diet alone is very, very difficult. So even though you can see, like on this 2023 randomized control trial, that there was no difference in cognitive aging between the Mind Diet group and the control group, the Mind Diet group still had really great benefits. The control group also had really great benefits, but it's also because they were both getting counseling from a dietitian and they were both restricting calories. So it's kind of hard to compare the two because they were both doing much better than they were before. The Mind Diet group did slightly outperform the control group though. And then as you can see in this 2021 study on Mind Diet and then Parkinson's specifically, that they showed that diet, the Mind Diet specifically, can possibly delay Parkinson's disease onset in females. With males, they didn't see the same results, and the researchers just concluded that they needed more research as to why that was. So I guess the bottom line is it ever too late to start? And the answer is no. I will never say that it's too late to start eating healthfully. Absolutely not. There's many benefits regardless of whether you were already diagnosed with dementia or not. With that being said, of course, if you start prior to developing dementia, then the chances of you delaying are much better. Once you have developed dementia or you are in the throes of it, then of course you may not see as big of an impact with brain health necessarily, but you will see impacts in other ways. And so I listed a few of those key points here. So lowered odds of functional impairment and decline. And so just thinking about, am I able to still care for myself? You know, can I get out of my chair? Am I still able to move around? Reduced risk of breast cancer in women. Breast cancer, I believe, is the #2 cause of cancer in women in the United States. So, of course, that's a huge reason to eat healthfully. And then increase longevity, so living just a good long life. So, lots and lots of health benefits of eating well aside from brain health, but I'm a huge believer in prevention. I'm a believer in food as medicine. And so the sooner the better, of course. Okay, so how does it work? And I tried to explain this a little bit earlier when we talked about oxidative stress, but essentially the Mind Diet is rich in certain vitamins, carotenoids, and flavonoids, and what those nutrients do is they reduce oxidative stress and inflammation. So vitamins are going to be, of course, your fat soluble, vitamin A, D, E, and K, and then your water soluble vitamins, all your B vitamins. And then vitamin C as well. And then carotenoids and flavonoids are large classes of compounds called phytochemicals. And I'm not sure if y'all have heard that term or not. I like to think of it as nature's lanyard, essentially. So you have vitamins, you have minerals. So we just listed all the vitamins, minerals being like calcium, potassium, etc. But then there's these certain little things that we've started to discover in the past, let's say 20 years or so, maybe even longer, called phytochemicals. And phyto literally stands for plant in Greek. And so I call it nature's lanyard because they also have such an amazing benefit on our body in terms of oxidative stress reduction. And it's so hard to silo these out and figure out, whoa, this one's really amazing or this one's really amazing because there's thousands of them. And all these different foods, depending on the color that they are, will contain a handful of them. But carotenoids and flavonoids are like your big overarching ones, and they're found in a lot of foods. So when I think of carotenoid, I think of beta carotene. So of course, like anything that's got that beautiful orange color, sweet potatoes, carrots, but even some of your green vegetables, of course, will have it as well. And then flavonoids are going to be found in things like your berries or your wine. And so basically the gist of that is the more plant-based foods you eat, the better. And so again, they reduce this oxidative stress. If you look at the picture on the right of your screen, what you're seeing is what they're calling a normal cell, free radicals attacking the cell, and then a cell with oxidative stress. And so they compare it to a browning of an apple. So free radicals, again, they're attacking that cell, they're trying to damage that cell, and then if we don't have an antioxidant come in to save the day, then it can actually ruin the cell. So that and increase inflammation, which is what we're trying to prevent. So you're like, okay, that's a lot of information. So what do I even eat? Tell me what I need to eat. And so here's the answer. So in the Mind Diet score, there were 10 foods that you should include. So whole grains, green leafy vegetables, other vegetables, which I know is super broad. So basically the gist is no vegetable is bad. Nuts, berries, beans and legumes, so things like lentils, fish, poultry, so chicken and turkey, olive oil, and then wine. And we'll get into wine in a little bit. It's got an asterisk right there. And then 5 foods to limit. So pastries and sweets. So think all the stuff that we're probably going to be eating at Thanksgiving, like pie and cake and cookies, pastries like donuts, red meat. And so red meat is not only beef from cows, but also from pork, from lamb, deer. We do live in South Louisiana. Cheese, fried or fast food, and then butter and margarine. So we're going to get into specific details about how much, how often, and then why are these foods in the categories that they're in. So the foods to include. So these foods are rich in vitamin E, which again, if you remember from earlier, it's a potent antioxidant, folate, which is a B vitamin, omega-3 fatty acids, carotenoids, and flavonoids. So these are your very nutrient-dense foods. So when I talk about nutrient density, I kind of consider it like bang for your buck. Like I only spent $1, but I got $100 worth of stuff. So it's really, really amazing nutrient-dense foods to eat. So let's get started. So whole grains. So I'm not sure if y'all are familiar with the term whole grain or not, but essentially this just means that it's an unprocessed grain. So if you're eating white rice with your gumbo or you're eating some white fluffy bread for a sandwich, then that grain has been stripped of its fiber. And so that's how you get that really fluffy white flour. And so a whole grain is where you haven't removed that fiber and the grain stays intact. So whole wheat bread, whole wheat pasta, are your wheat products. But then, of course, you also have brown and wild rice, oats, quinoa, farro. There's quite a few whole grains. I know some of them aren't quite as popular, but I feel like our oats are relatively popular. And then quinoa is one that's up and coming. It's a very high protein grain. And the goal is that you're doing 3 or more servings of whole grains per day. So this doesn't mean you can't ever eat white rice with your gumbo. I'm not saying that, but if you're eating, let's say 6 grains in a day, then you want at least 3 of those or half of those to be whole grains, just so you're getting that fiber component. And again, remember, everything that we're focusing on is nutrient dense. Fiber is a huge part of the Mediterranean diet, just because plant-based foods in and of themselves are considered high in fiber if they're in their whole unprocessed form. So whole grains, a serving would be considered half a cup cooked. So half a cup of cooked oatmeal, half a cup of cooked brown rice, or 1 ounce, which essentially is like 1 slice of bread. And so when we think about serving sizes, and I don't know if y'all can see this or not, but half a cup is not very much. So you do have to be conscientious of portion sizes as well, although that's not necessarily a basis of the Mediterranean diet. It's just for reference if you're interested in that. So next is green leafy vegetables. So the recommendation is 6 or more servings per week. So basically 1 a day is what I would take away from this, instead of just trying to figure out which day I'm not going to do it. I'll just say, all right, green leafy once a day. And 1 serving is a cup raw. So if you're eating a spinach salad, for example, if you did a cup of spinach, that would be your serving. Or if you're doing something like some roasted broccoli or steamed broccoli, then half a cup cooked would be your serving. So I have a beautiful picture down here. The green leafy vegetables are going to probably be one of your highest antioxidant foods that you can possibly eat, which is why it's so highly emphasized in the diet. Next, we have other vegetables. So I will say this is other vegetables, non-starchy vegetables. So starchies are going to be things like potatoes, corn, peas. And so other vegetables are really going to be your non-starchy. So like I listed zucchini, squash, green beans, asparagus, cucumbers, carrots even. I didn't put carrots on here, but all of those other vegetables, you want to get at least one serving of those per day, if not more. I would ideally, and I don't know if I have this anywhere else in the presentation or not, but I would say ideally you're getting about 5 to 9 servings of fruits and vegetables daily, which is equivalent to 2 cups of fruit and 3 cups of vegetables. So the more the merrier. I feel like that's the one thing we'll never get wrong or go back on in nutritional science is saying that we told you to eat too many vegetables. So at least one serving per day. And then, of course, if you can stay seasonal, that's best, right? Because when it's in season, it's cheaper. And of course, it's going to be at its highest nutritional peak because you have all the right conditions. Nuts. So I am a huge nut fan. No pun intended here. So 5 or more servings per week. And so again, this is one of those things where I just say, all right, 5 or more servings. If I can just do it most days of the week, I will. I love to use nuts as a snack just because it's so easy and convenient and there's such a good variety. I like to stick to walnuts or almonds. I know pistachios are on here. Those are great. Cashews are great. Some people eat Brazil nuts for the selenium, so there's no such thing as a bad nut. The only one that I might err on the side of caution is a macadamia, just because those are a little bit higher in saturated fats. And if you'll notice, that's a trend with all the foods to include is that they're lower in saturated fat. But the walnuts in particular have a higher omega-3 fatty acid content than other nuts. So if you're looking for a way to get that in, if you're not a big salmon lover, walnuts are a good place to start, along with chia seeds. So 5 or more servings per week of those, and one serving is 1 ounce. So I like to tell patients probably if you cupped your hand, whatever you could pour into your hand without it spilling everywhere is considered an ounce. Or if you're looking for a cup measurement, probably what would fit in this 1/4 cup right here. So not very much, not very much, but it's got enough heart healthy fats and fiber and protein to where it should be very satisfying. Next, we have berries. So berries are going to be your highest fiber fruit, especially raspberries, and just the potent colors should be an indicator of how rich in antioxidants these foods are. So the recommendation is 2 or more servings per week. Now, berries are definitely seasonal, right? So we just had a really beautiful season in the summer with our berries. So I'm a big believer in frozen berries as well, because when you're growing them in peak season and then you freeze them, they're still very nutritionally valuable, nutrient dense. So I'm all about frozen berries as well. And I use those in smoothies, oatmeal. I'll even just thaw them, put them in yogurt. There's so many things you can do with them. So 2 or more servings per week is the recommendation. And then the serving size, you get a lot of bang for your buck with berries. So up to a cup, and which is pretty significant. I feel like when I talk about berries, most people aren't eating a whole cup. You know, they might just be doing a sprinkle. So if you're looking to fill up, then this is a great way to do it. Next, we have our beans and our legumes. So this is such a wonderful plant-based protein. So if you are looking to decrease the meat in your diet, beans and legumes are a fantastic fiber-rich plant-based protein to add in. I'm doing it myself for lunch today instead of meat. So for beans, you've got your garbanzo or your chickpeas, black beans, kidney beans, pinto beans, navy beans. We live in Louisiana, so you probably have red beans on Mondays if you stick to the New Orleans tradition. And then your legumes are going to be things like lentils and peas. 3 or more servings per week. If you are following Mediterranean guidelines, then they are advocating for one meatless meal a day. And so, of course, in my opinion, the meal that I would go meatless for, of course, is breakfast, because typically those breakfast meats are going to fall into the not recommended category, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But a serving of beans is 1/2 cup cooked, so the more the merrier. And just to give you, for instance, I have a salad today, and so instead of putting any kind of meat, I just drained and rinsed a cup of black beans, and so that is what I put on my salad to give me that extra protein punch. Next, we have fish. So 1 or more servings per week. Ideally, I would even say 2 a week would be fantastic. And then 1 serving is considered 3 to 4 ounces cooked. So if you're eating like a white, flaky fish, I would say your checkbook, if you're familiar with the checkbook, that's about the length and the width that it should be. Otherwise, the good old deck of cards comparison is the serving size that you're going for. Salmon, tuna, sardines, which I don't know how popular those are, but those are going to be your highest omega-3 fatty acid fishes. And then things like rainbow trout, barramundi, cod, there's no such thing really as a bad fish, but the salmon and the tuna in particular are going to be your highest in omega-3. And why omega-3 fatty acids are so important in general is just because that fat is such a pivotal component of cellular membrane health. And so when you have a healthy cell membrane, um, your electrolytes are able to stay in better balance. You can get fluid and hydrate that cell so it's really plump like a grape instead of like a little shriveled raisin. And then it also helps our cells in our brain communicate a little bit better. So omega-3s are so important. They're mainly consumed in the diet. We can make a little bit of it in our bodies, but we rely on it from our diet. And where we are seeing a lot of inflammation these days is that we're getting a lot of what I call omega-6 fatty acids. So think of like your plant-based oils. I don't even know if that's the best way to put it, but like your safflower oil, your sunflower oil, a lot of these oils that are becoming very popular in processed foods are high in omega-6 fatty acids, which omega-6 isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just that our ratio of them is so much higher than omega-3. So really by eating fewer processed foods and increasing your fish intake, or remember from earlier, walnuts, you can really help with that omega-3 ratio. And that would be a great way to help reduce your inflammation. Next, we have poultry. So that deck of cards reference that I just made is compared here to a piece of chicken. A lot of times the chicken breasts that I see in the store are probably double or even triple that size. But again, 3 ounces cooked is about all you need at a meal. And so 2 or more servings per week is the recommendation. So just like fish, you can eat meat. The idea is that you're just not eating too much of it. And so this is chicken or turkey, which I don't know about y'all, but turkey is very traditional. Thanksgiving for us, which is coming right around the corner. And then if you're doing ground turkey or ground chicken, you're looking for 93% lean. And just because the leaner it is, the less saturated fat it's likely to have. And then I know I said chicken breasts, skinless just because it's that fatty layer that we can take off, and so we can reduce that saturated fat. But chicken thighs should also be fine. Next, we have olive oil. So olive oil you should just be using throughout the week. It should be your primary oil. And then a serving is a teaspoon, so it's not very much. So a teaspoon, just for reference, is about the tip of your thumb. And so you don't need a lot. Olive oil you have to be careful with when you're cooking with it because it is a very heat unstable oil, if you will. It can't tolerate lots and lots of heat. The fats in it start to break down. They can become very rancid. And so whenever I think of olive oil, I think of extra virgin, which is cold pressed, it's unrefined, so that it hasn't already been exposed to heat. So you're maintaining that antioxidant capacity. And then I'm using it for things like salad dressings or even a marinade where you're taking the meat or whatever out of it, and then that way it's not going to have as much of an impact. If you're doing high temp roasting or something along those lines, I personally use avocado oil just because it can go up to about 450 degrees safely without becoming rancid. And so I would say olive oil should be a daily. Olive oil should definitely be a daily. All right, so what about wine, right? Because I feel like that just soared in popularity when the Mediterranean diet became popular. And then, of course, we heard about resveratrol, and resveratrol just has all these heart health benefits. And so I need to drink wine so my heart can be healthy. So let's take that with a grain of salt, no pun intended, right? So if you are already drinking, then you can allow yourself up to one serving a day. All right. One serving is 5 ounces. So it's not very much. It's a little over half a cup. If you don't drink, please don't start. And the reason I say that is just because there's so much information that we know about alcohol and even wine, and because it can also be linked to things like breast cancer. I don't advocate for wine, so I just put the Mediterranean diet guidelines up here. It was included in the original score, but it's not something that you have to do to still have all the wonderful benefits. It is high in resveratrol, which is a flavanol, and you can get those things, or get that particular phytochemical from berries and other plant-based foods in your diet. All right, so foods to limit. So these foods are higher in saturated and trans fats. So basically, I consider these our energy dense foods. So when we think back to our plant-based foods, we call those nutrient dense, which means you're getting a lot of bang for your buck. Energy dense is almost like you overpaid for something. So you're getting lots of calories, lots of fat for not a lot of product. And so the saturated and trans fats, think of these things as your artery clogging fats. These are the things that can decrease brain health because they are promoting inflammation and plaque formation as well. So, pastries and sweets, I think what I should have backed up and said is that it's not to say you can't ever eat these things, because I'm a dietitian, but I'm also realistic. And so I understand that, you know, food should also be enjoyable, and there's special occasions like your birthday where you want to have a slice of cake, and that is totally okay. So it's just a matter of how much and how often, right? So with pastries and sweets, we're looking at less than 5 servings per week. So that's still pretty generous. It's saying, okay, you could even have, you know, a donut on a Saturday if you wanted to. But I'm always thinking, you know, one is better than two, and then none is better than one. So up to you, but less than 5 servings per week. One serving is a single portion. I know that's not very descriptive, is it? But, you know, for instance, if you're eating a donut, it's one donut. If you're eating a cookie, it should be the size of probably, I think everyone knows what an Oreo is, or a Chips Ahoy, you know, probably a 2-inch cookie, not the ones that we're getting from Crumble or Great American Cookie that are, you know, the size of a CD. And then something like a pie, typically depending on the size of your pie or your cake, 12-inch cake, then it should be divided into 12 pieces. So I like to follow personally the 3-bite rule, which means, you know, I take 3 bites of whatever it is that I want, and then after that I'm good. And typically that's a good way to follow this appropriate serving size for pastries and sweets. And again, a lot of times these are going to be, or not a lot, always really, they're always going to be high in saturated fats, especially things that have a very, very long shelf life. Trans fats in particular, those are the ones that can drive bad cholesterol up, good cholesterol down. And so they are particularly bad for heart health and for brain health. So red meat, less than 4 servings per week, which is 3 ounces cooked. So again, not saying never. I would personally recommend less than this. So I try to stick to once a week if I can, and then the rest of the time I'm eating chicken, fish, or beans. But again, you have less than 4 servings per week. Just remember, beef, pork, and lamb are all considered red meat, and then deer as well. So is it okay to enjoy steak? Absolutely. But see if you can prepare it without butter. There's lots of different things that you can do to kind of counterbalance something like this. You can eat it with a really big green leafy salad and some broccoli and some whole grains. So that way you've got that fiber and antioxidant component to your meal as well. Cheese. So this one broke my heart a little bit because I love cheese. I love cheese, but it is actually the biggest source of saturated fat in the American diet, if you can believe that. And so less than 1 serving a week was the recommendation for cheese, which, like I said, it's upsetting because I love cheese and it's a great source of protein. But I guess it's all in respect to what else you're doing. So that's the way I look at it. So a serving is an ounce. So I think about like those mozzarella cheese sticks or like the little cheddar squares that come prepackaged, or maybe like a quarter cup of shredded cheese. That is considered a serving, or like those little baby bells are probably a little under an ounce. So that's what a serving of cheese is. And any type of cheese, it doesn't matter. They do have all varying um, fat content, but just to make my life simple, I lump them all together just because it's easier. And now if you're going to ask about low fat cheese or no fat cheese, feel like that's fun-free cheese. Think that fat is part of what gives it its flavor. But if you're looking for a middle ground, I guess the reduced fat is a better option, and it typically should have less saturated fat as well. And then fried food. So fried food, I feel like that's a recommendation no matter what you're trying to do to improve your health, whether it's to prevent dementia or diabetes or prevent cardiovascular disease. Fried food should just not be in anyone's diet, but nonetheless, here we are, less than one serving per week. And again, one serving is a single portion. So I don't know if y'all can see the portion distortion behind me, or if anyone has been through McDonald's lately to get a Happy Meal, but a serving of French fries, if you've gotten a McDonald's Happy Meal lately, it's got the funniest little container of French fries. I mean, it can't be any bigger than this. It probably has 10 French fries in it. That is an appropriate serving. And so you probably feel like, oh my gosh, that's it. But that is a single serving, or a piece of fried chicken. I know a cheeseburger isn't fried food, so I guess this should really say fried food and fast food. So things that are just ultra processed, which means that they have been adulterated so much that they no longer look like what they did when they originated, whether that be from the cow or from the dirt or whatever. So just anything that's fried or fast food, we should avoid, just because these things are typically going to be higher in your saturated and your trans fats. And then last but not least, butter and margarine. So margarine in particular, this is going to be your trans fat heavy things, so spreadable. Now this has changed in the past 10 or so years. You know, when I think of margarine, I think of back in the day, like Crisco and Country Crock, which were trans fats. And back in the day, they thought, oh my gosh, this is amazing. You know, this stuff keeps forever. And then what we realized is, oh boy, we thought saturated fats were bad. Well, we just really created a monster. But now they have things like Smart Balance and Promise and Earth Balance and all of these butter alternatives, which are made with your plant oils, which are a little bit better, not quite as much saturated fat as butter. The goal is less than 1 tablespoon per day. If a patient's asking me about butter, like on a piece of toast, you know, if I say if it's less than a teaspoon, I think you're fine. I also highly recommend grass-fed butter if possible, just because, and grass-fed beef for that matter, just because that does change the omega fatty acid content of the meat. So you tend to have healthier fatty acids, ones that are less artery clogging than you would in a traditional corn-fed beef. So that goes for beef and butter. And a tablespoon, I think I said a teaspoon for oil, a tablespoon is basically like your whole thumb. All right, so sample menu. So if y'all just want to get an idea of what a day would look like, just think about it this way. The more stuff that grew from the dirt, the better. That's, if it grew from the dirt, it don't hurt. I know it's not grammatically beautiful, but it is just the easiest way I could think of to explain it. And so I love to just combine as many of those plant-based foods into one meal as I possibly can. So in the breakfast example, we've got a whole grain with berries and nuts. In lunch, we did a beautiful salad, which, you know, y'all are probably thinking, oh my gosh, the dietitian's recommending a salad. It doesn't have to be a salad. I don't care if you don't eat salad. I am a believer in leafy greens for lots of reasons, but if it's not your jam, that's okay. All the other vegetables are there, and broccoli would count as a green leafy as well. Plus the quinoa, it's a really protein-rich whole grain. And then if you drizzle that olive oil on it, and then in this particular recipe, which I can send to y'all if y'all are interested, it uses beans as the protein. And then for dinner, we had grilled salmon. If you're thinking, I don't like salmon, I've tried it, it's not for me, just remember you can also do any type of white flaky fish, tuna if you like tuna. Just stick to fish. That's the gist. You're going to get a lot of bang for your buck in terms of lots of protein, but really, really low in fat compared to other meat alternatives. And then brown rice, Brussels sprouts. For a snack, we did yogurt with chia seeds for that omega-3. You could also throw some berries in there or any other fruit. I know we concentrated on berries, but there's no such thing as a bad fruit either. It's just how much are you eating. So when in doubt, I like to stick to anywhere from half a cup to a cup when I'm eating a piece of fruit. And that goes, if I say a piece of fruit, any type of fruit. And if it's like an apple or a peach or something like that, I try to picture it fitting in here. And that's how I know I'm eating, a decent portion size. And then just in general, how do I add these things to my diet? I like to tell patients to add a fruit or a vegetable to every meal. If you are really going to try to get, excuse me, if you're going to try to get to that 5 to 9 servings a day, it's really, really hard to do at one meal. I mean, I would say it's probably next to impossible because vegetables and fruits have so much volume because they are also filled with water, which is one of the things that makes them very filling. And because of that, it's just hard to consume that much at one time. I mean, that would be equivalent to 5 cups, right? So I like to spread them out throughout the day, try to eat one at every meal, one at a snack if possible, and that way you're going to be closer to that goal. Choose nuts as part of a snack. You can sprinkle them on a salad. You can put them in your oatmeal in the morning. Nuts are fantastic. Make your own dressing with extra virgin olive oil. I use store-bought dressing, I'm not going to lie. It's very convenient, but I also do try to make my own if I have the time. And the reason I do that is just because a lot of the store-bought dressings are utilizing soybean oil or that sunflower, that safflower oil, those things that are higher in omega-6. And so I try to use extra virgin if I can, just so that I can have monounsaturated fat that's not so high in those omega-6 oils. And then choose themes. I am a huge fan of themes. I like to have fun with food. I like to think in themes because, I mean, there's only so many times you can eat chicken, brown rice, and broccoli before you just, oh my gosh, I need something different. And so when you have themes, you can infuse different types of flavors. But for this presentation, I stuck to Meatless Monday because we are trying to promote meatless meals, or really I should say more plant-based eating. And then Fish Friday, just because if you're looking for a way to incorporate fish into your diet at least once a week, having a set day is just an easy way to remember it. You don't have to think about it. Friday, it's the end of the work week. You're like, okay, I'm eating fish, easy peasy, lemon squeezy. And it cooks quickly, which is another selling point for Friday. Okay, so does preparation matter? So it depends on what nutrient, right? So most vitamins and some minerals decrease when exposed to heat. So that's why a lot of people are proponents of eating things raw, which depending on people in your family, they might not be a fan of raw vegetables. And so I get it. I like things roasted. That's just the way that I like things. But really and truly, the less heat exposure, the better. So I certainly would never advocate for boiling vegetables. I would use a steamer basket like you see in the picture right there. Avoid frying meats. Whenever you fry meats or whenever you grill meats and get those char marks, you are actually promoting carcinogen, which is cancer causing agents like those free radicals to form. So not only limiting heat exposure, but if you have to cook something at a high heat, then try to decrease the amount of time that it's exposed to that heat. And so, like I said, steaming is recommended, even for your meats like steamed salmon, or I know sous vide, if y'all have heard of that, is becoming more popular, where you package your proteins and then you put it in a low temp water bath and it cooks like that over time and it infuses that flavor. That's becoming very popular. And then stir frying. So even though it is kind of a high heat, you're doing it for a very short period of time and then you're done. So preparation, yes, it matters. Try to use low heat if possible, raw if you can. Although things like lycopene, which is found in tomatoes, that actually gets enhanced with cooking. But in general, for the most part, less heat, the better. And then I just stuck this in here because I feel like it's becoming more popular. If you haven't heard of it, intermittent fasting is there's lots of different variations. And so I think the most common one is just decreasing the window of time that you eat your food during the day. So I've heard of patients doing a 12 p.m. to 8 p.m. intermittent fast, so they don't eat breakfast. But I think what I would recommend as just a general overall healthy fast, because I do think that there's a lot of hazards to it as well, depending on your medical history, is just an overnight fast. I mean, that's what you're doing anyway. You eat dinner, you go to bed about 3 hours later, and then because you haven't eaten right before you go to bed, your body is able to do what it needs to do at nighttime to repair and recover and rest. And so when you wake up in the next morning and you break your fast with breakfast, that's in and of itself, I think, a very appropriate fast and plenty enough time to decrease that inflammation and improve insulin levels. But talk to your doctor. I don't like to make this a blanket rule for anyone. I was just putting it out there because I know that it's popular and that some of the research is showing that it's beneficial. I think it just really depends on the person. So book titles, just if you're interested in more recipes and more of the science, the Dr. Martha Claire Morris, which is the top book, she is actually one of the people that spearheaded the design of the Mind Diet. So just lots of good information, good resource from the creator herself. And then I think that is the end of my presentation. I know I talk a lot and I talk quickly because I get passionate and excited, but hopefully y'all learn something, and I'm going to open it up for questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Brooke. This was a great presentation. My mind is working already of thinking of how I can incorporate some of these things in my diet. And I absolutely loved all of your food puns. Those were hilarious. I'm sure that's something that doesn't get old in your job. Well, I mean, you have the opportunity to talk in food puns all day long, so might as well.
Yes.
I love it. Okay, so the chat box is open. If any of y'all wanted to ask any questions that y'all have, we have about a good 10 minutes left. So I'm going to read off the questions. We just got a question. Will this presentation be available to rewatch? Yes, it will be. It will be on our YouTube channel. And so I will send a follow-up email to everybody who is attending today, and that will have a link to our YouTube channel on there where you can rewatch this presentation. We'll probably have it posted within the next couple days, maybe this afternoon, just depending on how wild it gets over here. But any of our past presentations, we try, if at all possible, to record them and post them. So you'll find a lot of good dementia education support on our YouTube channel. Okay, so here I'll jump into the questions for you, Brooke. You mentioned grass-fed beef, better fatty acid proportions than corn-fed. Is there research on whether deer meat is better than beef or for a similar reason, like a deer diet?
So that's a good question. So I would say it's the same concept. So if you were deer hunting and they were wild deer and they were eating a traditional diet, then I would say they would have the better fatty acid profile as well. But I know my dad corn feeds his deer, and the whole idea of like corn feeding in general, whether it's deer or beef, is because you're making the animal fatter. I mean, that's the gist. So you're getting more of that marbling in your meat, and the marbling is fat, right? And so you're changing that fatty acid profile. So I would say it's the exact same concept, beef or deer. If you corn feed it, it's getting fatter, and those fats are the saturated fats.
Okay. Do you happen to recommend or have a quick infographic of the recommended foods?
Ooh, I'm sure I could find one.
Yeah, you can email it to me and I can send that in our follow-up email.
Yeah, okay. I can, in fact, I know that there's a handout. So yeah, I will do that.
Yeah.
Let me write myself
Okay.
a note.
And that question brings up a good idea. It's specifically for our loved ones with dementia, visual cues when, helping someone choose what to eat, visual cues are really helpful. So having, a picture of this graphic on your fridge, or having, some of those incorporated in with our, just a visual cue for ourselves and for our loved ones with dementia, that could be a great idea.
And I, Brooke, I honestly think that goes for anybody.
Mhm.
If you have a patient or a loved one with dementia, or even if you're just trying to prevent it for yourself, things that are convenient, accessible within your environment are the things that you're most likely to choose. So surrounding yourself, putting those things where you can see them, like the fruit basket on the counter, are great ways to just remind anybody, regardless of whether they have dementia or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, I got a question. Do you recommend, or what do you recommend for a family whenever they're trying to start incorporating a diet like this, but they're feeling overwhelmed?
Yes, I can see that. So I feel like if you try to go from A to Z, you're just never going to be able to make it sustainable. So what I would tell you to do is to think about the low hanging fruit. And what I mean by that is, what are the things that you as a family have in common? And what I mean by that is, there's 10 a list of 10 things that you should incorporate. So if you know, okay, everybody in the family loves berries. Well, that's an easy sell, right? Because everyone likes it. It's not like you're trying to convince, your toddler to eat blackberries when they don't like them. So it's like, okay, berries, number one, I'll start incorporating that. Or if you know that everyone likes broccoli as a vegetable, then you can say, all right, we're going to start cooking broccoli once or twice a week for dinner. So thinking about all the things that you as a family have in common that are easy for you to adopt, that's where I would start first. Because if you try to do everything at once, it's too much. So maybe one or two new things that are low hanging fruit, like I said, for the beginning. And then you can slowly start to try to um, incorporate new things. So, for instance, brown rice is like one of the hardest sells in this office. I don't know what it is, but we live in Louisiana. People love white rice, and so I'm a big believer in half and half. And same thing with beef. If y'all are interested, so like I'll say do half white and half brown, or 1 pound of ground beef with 1 pound of ground turkey, and mix those things up. And then that way you're automatically increasing your portion of what you have cooked, but then because you have some of that familiar with the unfamiliar, it's easier to tolerate, to get people to eat it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Next question. Can you touch more on what you were talking about with roasting vegetables? I know you also mentioned something kind of scary about grilled vegetables that I've never heard that before. So can you touch more on that?
Yes. Okay, good. And I'm glad you said that, because that is not correct. So grilling vegetables is fine. Um, and what I mean by that is that, yes, you're exposing them to heat. So you're probably decreasing some of the antioxidant capacity of the vegetable, but you're not creating carcinogens. Charred meat specifically, is when that happens. So it doesn't happen with vegetables. So grilled vegetables, totally fine. But the idea is that the higher the heat that you expose the food to, or the longer you expose it to heat, the percentage or the capacity of the antioxidant or the nutrient is decreasing at certain intervals. And I'm sorry, I don't know the exact science for the intervals, or there's certain ones that are probably more vulnerable than others. And so the gist of what I would take away from that is, honestly, just eat your vegetables. Because I feel like the risk to benefit ratio, like I'd rather you just eat, if you only like roasted vegetables and the thought of eating a raw vegetable makes you sick, eat the roasted vegetable. It's still going to have fiber, it's still going to have some nutritious value. So I wouldn't worry about it. But the more you can eat raw, the more you can steam, that low heat cooking, the better, the more likely you are to preserve. Now, let me give you, for instance, like if you're eating a vegetable soup, right? Because we're about to get into hopefully a cold snap. because you're cooking vegetables in that liquid and you're eating that liquid, that's a little bit different because anything that has been seeped out into the water, you're actually taking back in. So do keep that in mind as well. But the grilled vegetables, no, that was strictly for high heat, like any type of meat exposed to a flame is something that you really want to avoid if you can.
I've never heard that before. That is so interesting. Okay, great. Next question, is the white rice that LSU developed okay if you prefer white rice?
Yes, I've actually recommended that to a few patients because it is lower glycemic. I don't understand how they did it, but if ever someone was going to invent it, I'm glad it was LSU. And so I would say, yes, absolutely. I think that's fine because it is low glycemic. Now, the only thing I'm not certain of with Parish rice specifically is the fiber content. So even though it's lower glycemic, which basically means it's not going to spike your blood sugar, I don't know about the fiber component. So if you wanted to eat the white Parish rice, because it technically is better because of that glycemic load, I would still try to do whole grains for my other meals. So like the oats and the whole wheat bread, et cetera, et cetera. But absolutely, if you want to eat gumbo with white rice, the Parish rice is the way to go.
That is so funny that somebody asked that question because I just was hearing my sister-in-law talk about this Parish rice. It must be a hot topic these days.
It's relatively new, and they did a big press release, and every patient that I've talked to that's tried it said it tastes the same. So
Neat. Very cool.
yeah.
Very cool. Okay. Another question that we have time for maybe just a couple more if anybody else has a question that they want to submit. What are your tips for making this type of diet, this type of, nutrition lifestyle? What are your tips for making it more convenient?
With working for what?
What are your tips for making this type of diet more convenient?
Oh boy. That's a great question. I feel like if I had the answer to it, I'd be a millionaire. So okay, I'll give you for instance. Like today, I did not wash and dry all my produce or cook my beans. I bought a bagged salad from Costco and I drained and rinsed a can of beans. And that is my lunch for today. So, I kind of call it like the semi homemade version. And I feel like I'm still getting lots of benefits. So even though it's, something I didn't pick from the dirt myself, I still feel like I'm getting a lot of benefit from it. And then I always think about like, what could the flip side be? So yeah, I'm eating a bag salad with canned beans, but is it better than going through a drive through? Absolutely. And honestly, I feel like most people need to realize with nutrition, I look at the forest and not the tree. So, just overall in the landscape of what your diet looks like, how often are you including these things? And that's really your answer. In terms of convenience, though, I do use a lot of canned beans. I do cook a lot of my grains in bulk. So, like if I cook rice for the week, or excuse me, if I cook rice, then I'm cooking it for the week, and if I don't use it, I freeze it. That's one of the tips that I have. As far as produce goes, like fruits and vegetables, I know it's a lot of work, but I do feel like the sooner you get home and you clean, dice, rinse, whatever it is, the more likely you are to use it than actually throw it away. I know that doesn't make it convenient in the moment, but it makes it convenient throughout the week. And I mean, I'm sure y'all have all heard that before, but it's so true. You pay for it in the beginning, but you reap the rewards later on. And then nuts, I mean, you don't have to do anything for nuts. You just buy them and they're there. And so that's a really nice way to incorporate those into your diet.
Mhm.
So, and then frozen fruit, of course. So if you don't want to mess around with fruit, frozen fruit's already cut up and handled for you. So you could just use that in a multitude of ways as well.
Yeah, awesome. Those are great suggestions. Okay, and then one more question. What would your suggestions be for if my loved one lived in a care facility, like an assisted living or a nursing home, and I'm noticing that maybe they don't have all of these, maybe I'm not liking what they're offering at the cafeteria, the kitchen from the facility. What are your suggestions there?
Well, I don't know how much of an organizational impact you can have. I guess that just depends on where your loved one is. But is there any kind of policy where you can bring in foods and have little mini refrigerators? And then if so, I guess you would really have to consider like if anything is a choking hazard or do they need assisted feeding, something along those lines. So I would just probably stick to you're probably not gonna be able to include olive oil. That's okay. You're probably gonna oh gosh, that's such a tough question. Oh gosh, I feel like I'm on the spot now. Like even just access to fresh fruit would be really beautiful if you can do that. Trying to go, let me go back to my list here. You don't want them drinking wine at happy hour, that's for sure. Let's see.
And that's a tough question, but I figure
That is a tough question because I mean it's just so hard because there's just so many other variables that go into play there. I guess where you can start is just seeing if they'd be willing to do something different in their cafeteria, which that's really hard, right? So
maybe
normally I'm
we
all
can
about
recommend them to have a woman's hospital presentation by their dietitian. That's what
yeah.
I mean.
I don't I might have to think more on that question. That's a tough one. That's a tough one
Yeah.
because it's really something that's out of your control, right? So and then it just depends on their policy. So I think normally I'm all about what can I add to my diet to make it healthier, but in that instance, it might be about what can I try to limit or avoid, if possible. So if I'm not able to add these things, then maybe I can at least decrease my exposure to these other things, if that's even possible.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, that concludes our presentation. Thank you so much, Brooke. I think this was a great beginning lesson into the mind diet for a lot of folks, and hopefully everybody was able to take something away that they can use within their own brain healthy lifestyle, and then also pass along to our loved ones, and just better support them through their diet that way. Well, good deal. Well, thank you so much. This concludes our presentation. Thank you, Brooke, for your expertise and talent and sharing your time with us today.
Thank you. I
Thank
appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank everybody for joining us. I'm going to send out that follow-up email shortly. Thank y'all so much. Bye-bye.